I want to start today's pen and ink lesson by showing you how I've adhered a pencil sketch that I've previously drawn. I used the one from objective drawing. I'm doing the same one, I'm just doing it with a different type of medium this time. And I've used some painter's tape to adhere it to a surface. I'm going to recommend you do yours flat because ink can run. I'm going to just show you the tip of my pen. I'll bring it in a little closer. It's a pen with a little nib on the end. So the ink is held right in the tip right there. And that's what I've asked you to purchase for this assignment. Sometimes they slide into the pen, and sometimes they come with a little box like this, and there are different size of nibs that you can just slide in and out of your pen depending on which one you want. Your Black India ink will come in a box. It's going to look something like this. I'm just going to talk to you about hatching and cross hatching and how I would go about doing a sketch like this. It's very important you do an outline of your sketch, because India ink you're not going to be able to correct. If you make a mistake, you're going to have to start again. With this piece, I've got cowboy boots and a hat, but your sketch is up to you. It's just going to be something objective. I'm really looking at the composition. It's just a part of it, but the overall technique is what I'm going to really be looking for. So if you're left-handed, you might want to start on the right side of the page. If you're right-handed, I recommend you start on the left side of the page, and that's because this is very easy to smear and it takes a little while to dry, and for that reason you're not going to want to rub your hand across the surface of this page at all. I'm going to just show you how I dip into the inkwell. You just put it in, and when you pull out, you're going to need to wipe the excess off of the inkwell, because if you don't do that, you're going to start out with a bleeding line. And you can start anywhere on the page. It's a pressure that creates the line, so you're just going to push and pull the ink down the page. Sometimes it helps to leave a little bit of your finger on the page as a guide to a larger or smaller tip. And I'm not just going to outline, I'm actually going to do a parallel line, because that is the nature of pen and ink. So I've zoomed into one area just so that you could look a little bit closer. What I mean by a parallel line, I'm looking for lines that run approximately the same direction up and down the page, and that's how you're going to do a cross hatching, is just running that ink line parallel to the one beside it. Now the closer I space my lines, from far away it's going to look darker. And the other way of doing that is to add more lines. So up and down is one direction. There's going to be an angled line which goes 45 degrees. Is the other way you can do it. And finally, this straight across line. Which is like this. Now in this case, you're going to also have to plan out where a darker area might naturally look. So for example, on this section, I do have a piece that recedes on this boot. What do I mean by recedes? It moves back. So if it's going back and underneath something like this head of a boot, I may want to take a thin script brush and accentuate it more so than I normally would by doing a solid area. I can block in a bit of a solid area and then take my ink pen again, the calligraphy pen, and just pull it out somewhat so that it blends, almost like paint blends, so that some of the area is in shadow and some of it is just leading into the shadow. So there's a harsher shadow and then there's a softer shadow. And again, you don't always have to go all four directions. It's sort of a matter of testing what you want to do, how close, how far those lines are spaced is going to depend on what you want them to look like. So I'm going to try a different pen now. So I'm going to switch nibs and you just slide it into the top of the pen, depending on what your pen is that you have. So I've got the area a little bit more worked in now so that you have an example. It's almost like cartoon work. Sometimes you look at a comic book and those black and white lines stare out at you. And it's also a textural effect. It's like early printmaking, really, where they just had a very black and white basic effect. It's a lot easier to do this when it's lying flat as opposed to up in the air. So definitely, have a clean surface, tape it down, make sure it's not anywhere special in case you spill any ink. It is a little bit messy, very runny type of medium to work with. And anyhow, you just work that drawing until it looks the way you want it to look, and then step back from the area and have a look at it from a distance, because it's from far away that you're going to be able to see if it's giving you the effect that you want it to. So once I get this all worked in, it's going to look very accented, very three-dimensional, and nice texture, nice line. It's a good subject I picked because there is a lot of line detail. Just to get the rough outline done so you can see it a little better. And basically, I'm still working on the right side since I'm left-handed. I'm trying not to rest my hand flat on that surface to prevent smearing. Once you do the rough outline, that's when you're going to think more about light and dark and where you want to accentuate detail and shading and where light is hitting an object. If you find it easier to work from life, you can do that. If this were a bit in front of me, you might see a running stitch, which is just stopping along the way. It's like seeing threads that are pulled through something and they come in and out of an object and they stop. So that's not an aspect necessarily of hatching or cross-hatching, but it certainly adds detailing to a drawing, and is something you can incorporate in certain subject matter that you might paint. And when you zoom out on that, it makes it look more special. In that area, it looks more finished, because as a whole, we're giving a lot of accent right now to the top half of the boot. But I could continue on to different sections of the boot as the ink dries, and that's the key point there, because you don't want to smear your work and have to start over, because this will take quite a lot of time to do a full large sketch like I'm doing. So I can pull line coming the opposite direction, because if this was the sole of my foot or the top of my boot, you would actually see the line coming over the shape of the foot. So it's good to do the line the way something might naturally sit as well. So I'm going to do the same thing on the top of this boot, but I'm spacing my line a little bit wider, as though the boot in behind again is sitting more in the shade, in the shadow. And to accentuate that a little more, I'm going to take some cross hatching line the opposite way in a few different directions, because I really want to push that boot back. Not physically, just optically. So we came this direction. You can go all four directions, but fill in the area that you intended to. And again, choose the width of your line really carefully, because the width is going to define where an object starts and where it ends. You may have to switch pen nibs if you've bought a set of nibs to get a different thin line and a different thick line. So you keep working the area. You have to sometimes let one section dry and go back to it before you can add or decide. You sometimes need to stand back and look at it as a whole. I think before I carry on there, what stands out to me is this section here. There seems to be too much negative space there right now. I need to sort of fill in that area so that it balances with how I've treated the rest of the boot. So we zoom in there, give you a better idea. Because you look at the design as a whole, and you're going to treat it on the same parallel. And I've ran out of ink there, so I'm filling up again, taking my line direction up. Crisscross. Up and down is another direction for really darkened areas. But you may find that you don't need to do all four of those line directions in every section. It's sort of up to the artist as they go along how much line and when is a good point to stop. The stopping point is up to you, but you have to use your natural aesthetics, your eye to guide you. So zooming out, you can see it's receded now, that second object, because of all the line. It looks quite different than the boot in front of it. To balance it a little bit, I think I would carry some more of the line into this boot in the foreground, but not necessarily a lot of it. I think with the amount of line that's naturally in the lacing and the stitching, that you don't need to show too much, but just balance it a little bit by pulling in some line details in different areas. Some places where maybe you want to show a little more or less. You can do different lengths in different areas, just blocking in some ink. And then you may want to leave some spaces white because it creates a nice contrast, the light and dark. I'll zoom in there and show you a little bit how that turned out. It's nice, those thin and thick lines. This part here, really, the heel really shows what this assignment's all about. The different depth that you get, the three-dimensional effect. So there's nice balance and symmetry in this. I like to focus on that hat because when we're looking at this composition as a whole, until it's done, it's sort of sitting in space and you're wondering what's going on. I didn't, like, in a lot of artwork I'm going to say the background would have been done first, but because of this being on my right side, I wanted to do this one first, and I'll go back and do the other part when it's dry. That part's pretty straightforward. You're going over your pencil lines and then deciding where your hatching and cross hatching is going. And I started with the band of the cowboy hat to begin my set of parallel lines that I'm going to place into this subject matter. You can see how placing those lines really close together, just pushing hard down, let that ink run solid. Because this, if this were a colored band on the hat, it would look pretty dark if it were in black and white. So I can rest my baby finger on the paper while I do the dragging of the nib. If it helps at all, you can certainly do it that way. And maybe the center is getting a little more light than the fabric would on that band. I think the band would be so dark that it would require the cross hatching to come in different directions, because that also is another way blocking in color, I should say blocking in black, and blocking in different thick lines, dragging the line side to side, up and down, different directions of parallel line to create that three-dimensionality that texture that we're looking for in the pen and ink drawing. I can also make my lines different lengths. You can see how I've done that in there. Where the band of the hat would be raised, right here, going up and out usually, there would be a shadow cast. So that's what I've achieved by doing the linear line detail like that. The more line I put in, the closer they're spaced together, the darker that cast shadow would be. And for the symmetry of the hat, I would probably want to do the same thing because it has two sides. On this side, it's easier to run the ink down actually because my paper is vertical and yours isn't going to be, so you won't have as much trouble with that. But if your pen did dry up, you can rinse it out with water, and in fact when you're done this sketch, make sure you clean out the nibs because they tend to clog. If you don't, you want to use your pen again and again. The pens at the dollar store, they look more like this. You can use that if you find the ones that are at Michael's or the art supply store you've went to a little too expensive. It's up to you, whatever works for your budget. So the hat is broad, so I may want some of those broad strokes to come right forward and show some of the way the hat would actually sit. I guess what I'm saying is the way the felt sits on a hat, it falls forward. So I'm going initially with the broad stroke that that hat would actually lay if it were in front of my eyes right now. And don't forget this section because it's receding. And because it is receding, I'm going to want to place some detail in the strokes I use here. See how quickly I can do it once my pen is, the ink is flowing perfectly in the pen. I may want to add a little more line somewhere where I want to show a stronger shadow, because shadow tends to have different depths of tone to it. Some of it's darker shadow, some of it's lighter shadow. So where I want it really dark, I need to make more line. First of all, closer together. And secondly, I may bring in all four directions that the line can sit, because we can go this way, we can go this way, or this way. If you recall, I've posted that in our introduction to this lesson. So some of the area I really want darkened, I'm going to use that knowledge of cross-hatching and create more directionality where I want some real depth.